So we are in the last week, this week, of a intensive that some of us have been participating in. We've been studying how do we find true refuge. And part of that process has included telling stories of our ancestors. Stories of the people who walked the path before us, who showed us the way, and from whom we could take inspiration. Finding the courage, the tenacity, the tenderness to keep going, even in the face of what might seem impossible. Many years ago, I often say 10 years ago, and then I realize, no, it was 20 years ago, and now I have to say 30 years ago. How did that happen? 30 plus years ago, when I lived here in residence, I practiced here at City Center and lived at Green Gulch Farm and Yasodhara. I loved the practice that we would do in morning service of reciting the names of the ancestors and bowing to them, honoring them, thanking them. This great list of daioshos of great teachers from India through China to Japan. And I loved learning about them, learning about their stories. These very quirky, human people like us who struggled with all kinds of inner and outer difficulty. There's something wonderful about recognizing that we are part of a living lineage, that these were real people like us who found their way and whose examples, whose stories, whose struggles help us understand what's possible. Some years after I left living here, I was invited to go back to Yasodhara, to the mountain monastery, to sit a retreat, a sesshin. And when I was there, I was surprised. This was now, again, a long time ago, but I was surprised during morning service to hear a new to me, chant announced, which was to chant the names of the women ancestors. And unlike the daioshos, whose names I had memorized, whose stories I had grown somewhat familiar with, I didn't know their names. I didn't know their stories. I couldn't find the chant in the chant book. I went frantically looking because I had memorized the names of the other lineage, the male lineage, but I didn't know about these acharyas. And I went looking for the chant, for their names, and I gave up. I remember I put the chant book down, and I just sat in the room and listened as the names of these women who were unknown and had been unnamed until that time for me. And I let their names wash through me. And when the chanting ended, I burst into tears. I don't think I knew how much I had missed them until I heard their names. So today I want to share some stories about some of our early women ancestors. But before I do, I want to acknowledge and say out loud that really to invite you to understand or take a wide perspective in understanding that as I'm talking about these women ancestors, that you could understand what I'm saying in a much broader context of a wide group of people or peoples who are unheard, underrepresented, often oppressed, unacknowledged, harmed. And we see this in so many painful ways in our world today. This deeply divided world in which immigrants, the BIPOC and LGBTQI communities, with the assault on DEI, we see this mind of othering, which is the heart of our suffering. This mind of othering toward Muslims and Palestinians and Jews and whole countries now in Africa who are being looked at askance and excluded, left out. And of course, sort of most egregiously in many ways, the assault on the trans and non-binary communities. So all of what I'm saying today, while I will be speaking in the particular about some women, holds true in the ways in which we can understand the struggles of many, many other groups of people who are struggling in systems of inequity and oppression. So if we move forward about 30 plus years from that time that I first heard the names of those women chanted in the meditation hall during service to the present, I spent a lot of time getting to know these ancestors, learning about them, and I didn't do it alone. I do want to call out and say the names of many people who have done beautiful, rigorous, creative research on the stories of these women. So many of you may have read some of the books by people like Susan Moon and Florence Kaplow, Grace Shearson, Wendy Garling, Jan Willis, Vanessa Sasson, Paula Arai. So if you want to learn more yourself, there are now these rich resources that you can turn to. And I'm deeply grateful to all of those people who did the legwork to make those stories available. So this January, I sat a retreat at Spirit Rock, the New Year's retreat. Many of you know I teach in the dual lineage of Zen and insight, Vipassana, meditation. And the New Year's retreat, would you like to come in and sit down? Yeah, please. The New Year's retreat was a retreat that I had taught or co-taught many times, but this time I was going as a student. And It was a really hard retreat. When people asked me after I got back from retreat, how was your retreat? I said, it was hell. From the moment just about that I stepped onto the land, it was just a constant repertoire of negativity inside. I didn't like the weather. I didn't like my room. My bed was uncomfortable. I hated where I was sitting in the hall. I was irritated by the person next to me who was sniffling. They didn't have food that I could eat. Like that. And it became pretty clear to me very early on that there was actually no problem out there. For any of you who've been to Spirit Rock, it's actually a bit of a heaven realm, But something was happening here. This ancient twisted karma of negativity, of aversion, of disappointment, of despair was just pouring through me, and it didn't have a lot of content. It was really hard. And at some point, I called in these women ancestors who I had been learning about and reciting their names, calling on my understanding of the struggles, inner and outer struggles that they had persevered through. So I called, at one point I remember I was walking, slightly different form of walking meditation that we do than kinhin, but similar idea, slow walking. I was by myself. And I did this ritual, it was a very informal ritual. As I was walking, I called them in, these ancestors. And I did it by standing in the middle of the room and silently, meaning inside my own mind, but in a very loud internal voice, I just said, "Help!" And they came. In Zen, we say, call and response come up together. And just to be clear, there weren't suddenly a lot of other people in the room with me, but I felt them. I felt their hands at my back. I felt their loving gaze. I felt their encouragement. I felt their examples. And it turns out they had some things they wanted to say. And they said, they said things I wouldn't necessarily have said to myself. So the first thing they said was, "You are us." That woke me up. And then they said, we want you. We want you to be free. We are rooting for you. And the last thing they said was something like, "You go, girl." And I laughed out loud in the midst of my hell, in the midst of my misery. And I'd like to say that after that happened, then everything was good. I sort of cruised, glided through the rest of the retreat. That didn't happen. It continued to be really difficult. But what shifted was that I was I no longer felt alone. I felt that I was part of this stream of all of us who are finding our way. So today, I want to say a little bit about some of these ancestors, and both past and present. And the first person I want to talk about a little bit, but only a little bit because she gets quite a bit of press now, is Mahapajapati. Mahapajapati is the aunt, the Buddha's mother's sister who raised him. And for those who want to know more about her, Wendy Garling has a wonderful, rigorously researched book called The Woman Who Raised the Buddha. Mahapajapati raised the Buddha, and I'll circle back around to her at the end, but she also is responsible or held responsible for the founding of what's called the Bhikkhuni Sangha, the women's monastic Sangha. And I won't tell the whole story today because you can read about it, but I will say that if you read her story, that it gives us a lot of clues about what's needed to transform systems of oppression, to change systems in which there is exclusion to be systems that have inclusion. Because Mahapajapati wanted to join the Sangha and she was told no repeatedly by the Buddha. And the thing that turned the story, well, there were three things. One was her persistence. She didn't take no. She kept going back. This is so important for us as we walk the path. And the second was that the third time that she came to ask, she brought 500 women with her. This is also good instruction. If you want to change the system, well, you need to join hands. And finally, because she brought all of these women with her, the story is that they were all standing outside the gates, wailing and crying because they had been told that they weren't going to be allowed to join the holy life. And Ananda, who was the Buddha's attendant, overheard their cries. He didn't just hear their cries, he went and asked them, "What's going on? Why are you crying?" And they told him, "We want to join the holy life." And Ananda went and confronted the Buddha. He shamed him actually a little bit. He said, "Didn't she raise you side by side with her own son?" And the Buddha said, "Yep." And he said, "And didn't you say that," I'll use our language of today, "didn't you say that people of all genders have equal opportunity to wake up?" And the Buddha said, "Yes." He said, "How can you not allow them to come?" So we need those of us who find ourselves in places in which we feel excluded, we need allies. We need people who will speak for us when we're not able to speak ourselves or when we're not heard. And when we find ourselves in positions of relative privilege, we need to be willing to not just hear the cries, but be curious to ask, what's going on? And then to have the courage, as we say in our sort of popular, our current vernacular, to speak truth to power, to raise our voices for those who may not be heard. But today I want to talk a bit about another story that is less well known from one of our early women ancestors. And this is the story of Yasodhara, who's the Buddha's wife. It's a very hard story. I think that's why it's not told that often. Many of you know the Buddha left his wife and newish born son, infant son, to go on his spiritual quest. And for many people, this is a difficult part of the story. I hear over and over, how could he do that? How do you make sense of that? What about? And I don't have an easy answer. It's just a difficult part of the story. Very little is known about Yasodhara. Unlike the book by Wendy Garling with all of this wonderful research about Mahapajapati, who, we chant her name, and she has a whole ceremony, and we refer to her in the echoes that we do here at the temple. Yasodhara is a much more quiet figure. In my own book, I wrote about Yasodhara, actually Mahapajapati as well, as fiction. And Vanessa Sasson, who has done some wonderful research, she too has written a book called Yasodhara, but she wrote it as a novel because there's so little we actually know about the story of Yasodhara. In the Pali Canon, she is not even mentioned by her name. She's referred to as the mother of Rahula. Actually, there is quite a robust kind of folk tradition, Buddhist folk tradition, in which there is the ballad of Yasodhara, and it is a ballad of grief. It's a ballad in which Yasodhara's sadness, grief, upset is kind of poured through, reflecting her experience of the story of the Buddha's departure. What we do know is that she was the daughter of a neighboring kind of head clansman. And as far as we can tell, it appears there was real love between Gautama and Yasodhara. There are later versions of the story in which it's said, it's kind of mythic version. It's described that Gautama and Yasodhara make love the night of the Buddha's departure, and that for the many years that he is out wandering, searching, that she remains pregnant. And that at the moment of his enlightenment, she gives birth. And likely untrue, but a wonderful way to try to kind of equalize, right, these parallel paths. And for me, this has been a long-held wish, vision, hope that sometimes the Buddha is described as he who goes forth, and Yasodhara is described as she who stays. That these paths of going forth, of renunciation, of kind of that style of spiritual practice could be met equally with what I came to regard as, the secret teachings of Yasodhara, right? The lost teachings of Yasodhara. I had this fantasy that one day, like the Tibetan Terma, they would find these teachings. Like the story of Nagarjuna going down into the sea to rescue the teachings on emptiness when people were ready. That the teachings of Yasodhara would be rescued from some secret place, and we would learn from her how it might be possible to practice at home, taking care of children and the garden and domestic life. I have been talking to lots of people during this intensive, and I've heard again and again here, as I hear in other places where I teach, this call from students who say something like, yes, I can come and sit zazen in the morning, or sit sesshin, or attend an intensive, and then I go back to my life. And now what? And I think that we, Western convert Buddhists, have done such a wonderful job in a relatively short amount of time in creating these beautiful temples and monasteries and retreat centers where hundreds, thousands of people have benefited from being able to come and dive in and taste the richness of silence, stillness, practice. Those people who have benefited include me. I am deeply grateful for the time that I've spent both living as a monk and doing many, many months of long silent retreat. But I think we haven't yet really fleshed out or found our way to, the Yasodhara side of the equation, to learning how to fully bring our practice into our lives, into our work, into our relationships, into our families and our busy lives. And I do want to be really clear that I am not saying this in any way as complaint. I'm saying it as opportunity. This is still, we're so young. Our digestion, our metabolization of Buddhist teachings in a Western or an American context. And there's so much more for us to unfold and discover together. So I want to end on a kind of happy note, not quite end, but which is that in some ways my secret fantasy vision of the secret teachings of Yasodhara came true. And some of you may know the work of Paula Arai, who is an author, a scholar, a practitioner, and she has this book called Bringing Zen Home. And in the book, she recounts long over time research that she did with 12 elderly Japanese women who were deeply dedicated Buddhist practitioners, but whose practice was at home. And she lays out some of the key discoveries and principles that she found by interviewing them, visiting with them, hearing their stories. At the heart of what they practice is making mundane activity into ritual, making the mundane sacred. She describes ritual as a conduit to an intuitive experience of interrelatedness that transcends linear, rational logic. So she describes their practice and their practices. She calls it messy Zen, this domestic Zen. Cooking, cleaning, parenting, bathing, dressing, managing, sewing, networking, creating, teaching, the endless list of women's unglorified daily activities are mined by these women who are seeking a distinctive spiritual expression. She says, Zen in daily life, messy Zen, is creative and flexible, unlike its monastic counterpart, which thrives on control and discipline and impeccable cleanliness. I always remember this wonderful video I saw many, many, many years ago of the monks at a Heiji monastery doing morning cleaning, soji, and just like terracing down these hallways with these, mops, just giving themselves to cleaning the temple. It was just so inspiring to see this impeccable cleanliness. She says, domestic Zen is at home with the chaotic, emotional, messy lives of people struggling with their families, their health, their jobs. The key for these women in engaging in the rituals is two parts. One is an honoring of the lineage, an honoring of the ancestors, a recognizing, as I did in a moment of extraordinary difficulty, that they too are part of a living lineage, and including their practice as that. You are us. They understand that. And all of that is rooted in a deep understanding of interconnectedness. And from that place, their practice includes gratitude, it includes practicing the creative arts, calligraphy, chanting, flower arranging, making things beautiful. One of the women who was interviewed said, I know I am healed. I know my practice is complete when I'm kind. So this kind of practice cuts to the chase, right? And gives us an example for many of us of what's possible. That we can begin to find our way to cultivate domestic Zen, messy Zen. Paula Arai describes that these kinds of practices, like Yasodhara herself, don't receive much scholarship because they're mostly done out of view. It's mostly done in a kind of quiet and hidden way. That doesn't make it less important. So we live in a world now that is in many ways on tilt. I use these words with some trepidation, but we could say there's an imbalance of masculine and feminine energies. And I mean that not at all as gender, but as energies that are innate in each of us. And we're having a big comeback of a kind of hyper-masculine bro culture, which is full of division, full of othering, full of harm. And it seems that it would be beneficial for all of us to pull through these threads that are described in this kind of domestic practice. These threads of non-linearity, of intuition, emotion, embodiment, beauty, kindness. This is a living lineage. It includes all of us who choose to enter. And all of us are welcome. In a world where there is so much othering and division and exclusion, this practice says, please come in and sit down. Join us. So I want to close with a poem from Mahapajapati, who I skipped over a little bit. Mahapajapati, as you heard, is known for her tenacity and grit, for her willingness to raise this baby in the midst of her grief after her sister died, and her unwillingness to take no for an answer. And one of the ways that we know that Mahapajapati and these other women are in fact part of the lineage is because of the record of what's called the Therigatha, which is the poems, the songs of awakening of the early Buddhist nuns. And this poem that I'm going to read is Mahapajapati's poem. And it comes late in life, after she has done much of the hard work of raising kids, of founding the Sangha. And for me, I hear in her words those qualities of kind of no nonsense, fierce tenderness, in which she is encouraging all of us to see the Buddha nature in everyone, and to recognize that seeing the Buddha nature in everyone doesn't mean sameness. It means celebrating difference. Here are her words. She says, I know you all. I have been your mother, your son, your father, your daughter. You see me now in my final role, kindly grandmother. It's a fine part to go out on. You might have heard how it all began. When my sister died and I took her newborn son to raise as my own, people still ask, did you know then what he would become? What can I say? What mother doesn't see a Buddha in her child? He was such a quiet boy. The first time he reached for me, the first time I held him while he slept, how could I not know? To care for all children without exception, to care for all children without exception, as though each will someday be the one to show us all the way home. This is the path. This is the path of finding true refuge in recognizing the Buddha in everyone. The people like you, the people not like you. Celebrating our uniqueness in the midst of our shared humanity, our shared Buddha nature. This is the path. Thank you very much for your attention.